This is Debrief, brought to you by the Australian Industry Group.
Welcome to Debrief, the podcast that explains industry to policymakers and government policy to industry, and is driven by Australian Industry Group's mission, which is to empower industry success for a better Australia. My name is Louise McGrath, Head of Industry Development and Policy, and today I'm talking with Tennant, Director for Climate and Energy, also at the Australian Industry Group. Hi, Tennant.
Hi, Louise. Great to be with you.
This is a special episode of Debrief. It's not out of our usual cycle because we felt we needed to react very quickly to let industry know what is required post yesterday's announcement of the emissions reduction target for 2035 that Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen announced yesterday. That target is 62% to 70% lower than in 2005. And we thought it was essential that we quickly dove into one of the most complex and consequential challenges of our time, which is how can industry contribute to Australia's 2035 climate target? Hopefully we'll get to explore the technical and economic realities, the role of the safeguard mechanism, and what smart support looks like for a competitive low emissions future. There'll be a lot of analysis on the actual target and all the sort of opinions and feelings about that. We're not focused on that today. We're focused on, we've got our target. Now what are we going to do? Now, Tennant, industry isn't homogeneous. There's all sorts of issues from process heat to heavy vehicles, from aluminium smelting to cement production. Every sector faces unique challenges. Can you walk us through some of the key subsectors and why a one-size-fits-all approach simply won't work?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some shared challenges, but there are a lot of unique ones for each sector and subsector. So if you look at the steel industry, whose output is an important input to a lot of the rest of the economy, primary steel making today produces a lot of emissions because coking coal, metallurgical coal, is used to turn iron ore, iron oxide, into pure iron, and then you start doing some metallurgy and adding in some carbon and some other elements to produce the right kind of grades and alloys of steel. What are we going to do instead of using coking coal? Because that produces a huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Globally, steel, about 6 or 7% of world emissions. Maybe we'll be using hydrogen instead of coking coal to reduce the iron ore. There are other options that are less well advanced. That's a different challenge to that of the aluminium sector, where most of their emissions currently come from electricity use, and most of that electricity today comes from coal. Now, the electricity sector is getting a lot cleaner over the next decade. That will solve most of aluminium's problem, and they're left with the anodes in the electrolysis process that they use to turn aluminium oxide into pure aluminium. Those anodes today are made of carbon, and as they erode, they produce carbon dioxide. So there's inert anode technology that is being commercialized in Canada, and maybe over the next 10 years, maybe slightly longer than that, we should be able to see that taken up in Australia. Most of industry has challenges around process heat. So whether we're using low-grade process heat to make hot water to clean food processing equipment, or medium-grade heat to melt plastic before injection moulding it, or high-grade heat to produce bricks or glass or melt metal, today most of that heat comes from burning natural gas, and that's relatively clean and efficient compared to how we used to do it, which again was with coal. Still is with coal in a couple of places, but there are still significant emissions with that gas. So some of those users will be able to electrify. Some of them are going to probably still be best off with some kind of fuel to burn, but it's going to have to be a clean one, like biomethane or maybe green hydrogen. There's just a lot of different challenges, and a solution that works for a bakery is not going to be the same solution as works for a metals foundry.
And given all that complexity and uncertainty, how can industry make the necessary long-term investments without losing their competitiveness in the short term? Because we're not all moving at the same speed globally, and people will have one eye on competitiveness and another eye on the emissions. So how do they bridge that gap?
Yeah, absolutely. And even though there is a lot of pressure these days from investors to report on your climate transition strategy, the investors neither have nor give a license to lose money. They expect companies to produce returns while they are reducing emissions. And so the target that's been announced in and of itself doesn't solve that problem. But what it needs to do is lead to adjustments to federal climate and energy and industry policies that provide a bankable, investable basis for businesses to make changes to their capital investment and to their operating spend that will be needed if they are going to take up biomethane, for example, which does not come cheap, or to change over their current furnace for making hot water for cleaning equipment, change that over to a high temperature heat pump. You may save money on a heat pump in the long term. It's a lot of capex in the short term. And so there's really a mix of policy sticks and carrots that are needed here. Of course, from government's point of view, the advantage of the sticks is that they don't cost government anything, whereas carrots don't come cheap. And the thing from industry's point of view that we need to know is, if they're bringing out the sticks, are we going to be better off just moving somewhere else where there are no sticks? Are there jurisdictions overseas with no expectations of industry decarbonisation or an all-carrot approach? And I think the safeguard mechanism, which you mentioned earlier, this policy is like, it's the biggest, it's mostly a stick, but it's got a carrot element as well. This policy covers the biggest sites in Australia, the facilities that produce 100,000 tonnes or more a year of direct greenhouse gas emissions. So from the burning of fuels within their boundaries broadly. That policy says if you emit at a greater intensity rate per unit of product that you produce than the baseline that they allow, then you've got to take steps to go back within your baseline, either by buying carbon credits or by changing your on-site emissions. And the baseline falls every year. So for those who are covered, that's going to be a big investment signal, or a big price signal anyway. The question is, can you face that price signal and still be competitive? And today, the solution to that is a slower rate of decline in your baseline if you are very seriously affected in a competitive sense. But that doesn't hang together forever. And the government's aware of that. They've been investigating a potential suite of different approaches. And one of those is what's called carbon border adjustment, which is a very interesting topic indeed.
Well, Tennant, you walked straight there because that's where it was leading us. I mean, as a trade person, there was a lot of announcements yesterday along with the emissions target and we can get into some of them, but, all sorts of, as you say, sticks and carrots and all the levers. But the one that we've all been waiting for as a particularly as a trade person, CBAM or carbon border adjustment mechanism was not announced yesterday. But
that's right.
It is an ongoing investigation by the government. We expect there might be an answer at some point.
Yeah, so they commissioned a while back an independent review to look into the underlying problem of what's called carbon leakage. So the risk that tough policy in Australia leads production of steel, cement, aluminium, other sensitive goods to move directly or indirectly overseas to jurisdictions with lighter burdens on emissions. And that review concluded that this is still a problem, despite the almost universal participation of nations in the Paris Agreement, the widespread pledges and policies that countries have made to reduce emissions. It's still a messy, multi-speed world. And it's one where every nation is trying to avoid compromising the competitiveness of these industries. And that review, its draft recommendations were that Australia should develop a carbon border adjustment mechanism, starting with those activities where it is most urgent because of their exposure to the safeguard mechanism, and most practical given the mix of imports and exports, the information requirements and how easy they are to satisfy, to have a fairly applied import adjustment. And their message was start with cement and expand to a limited set of activities over time. Now, the government, they haven't released the final report. They're going to do that soon. They did say, alongside the target release, that they were going to resolve this question of do you do a carbon border adjustment as part of the big review of the future of the safeguard mechanism that is set for 2026. That review has got a lot of big, meaty issues to consider, including should there be a faster rate of decline in those baselines given the large emissions reduction target for 2035 that has just been set? Should there still be unlimited access to Australian carbon credit units, which is a very important feature of that scheme currently? It has contained the abatement cost that facilities face, currently running at about $35 per tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent. Now, containing that cost has swings and roundabouts. The good side of it is less risk that a business faces such cost pressures that they can't stay in business. But also it's harder to make your investment plan for fundamentally changing your production process stack up if the carbon price is $35 versus $50, $70, $100. If the government introduces a border adjustment, what this means, I should have said earlier, is that the domestic carbon price, the Australian carbon price in the safeguard mechanism, gets applied not just to local producers of cement, but also to imports of cement, lime, and clinker, which go into to make cement. And that will mean a level playing field on carbon costs. It's not a stick that just whacks the importers in a discriminatory way. It's treating both domestic production and imported production in an even-handed way. They're going to have a further think about whether they do that, and the arguments for it are quite strong. The arguments for caution, though, are it's a very unsettled global trade environment right now, to say the least. And this is a complicated reform that would need to be explained well and done well domestically, and bringing our trade partners along at the same time. So it's not a bad idea to take the time to get it right, but you can't wait forever because these baselines keep on dropping. and the cost, out-of-pocket cost impact on large covered facilities will get bigger and bigger over time.
And as a trade person, my initial reaction to CBAM I can't even remember when or how, but when I first learnt about it was instantly, well, no, we can't have this. Might have been because the Europeans were suggesting it. But now when I speak to other trading partners, I was speaking with Malaysia last month, they are looking at their own CBAM. Countries around the world understand that if they're reducing their own emissions, they can't then force their local industry to just be hunting around for lowest common denominator. I mean, in reality, of course, as you know, it's not an easy thing. It's not a fast-moving consumable, a steel mill or, or concrete production. These are not, flight risks normally. But, money does move, and we've got to be careful that we don't just chase investors away and chase Australian industry away. And it is an at-border mechanism to keep things fair, as you say.
Yeah.
We really want our other partners to be involved, because otherwise exporters are potentially disadvantaged if there is not a reciprocal treatment of carbon in the destination market.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is a mindset shift, I think, for many people, because we often, if people think about carbon border adjustments at all, they think of it as something that is done to imports, against imports. And, if Europe's doing a border adjustment, well, how does that hurt Australia on our small quantity of exports of aluminium and steel to Europe? But actually, the thing that could help make reality of the hopes that Australia has for a green iron industry is the introduction of carbon border adjustments in China and Japan and Korea, which are three of the largest steel-making nations in the world, and which currently don't have a strong domestic price incentive to prefer cleaner steel with cleaner iron as its core input over higher emissions. Australia can be, as enthusiastic as we want about the making of the green iron, but that's no good unless somebody's actually going to buy it when there's high emissions iron on offer. And so these moves by other countries, of course, we want them to be non-discriminatory and low transaction costs to engage with their systems. And there's so much gain to be made through coordinating standards and data and making it as light touch as possible to engage with these different systems. But the more economies in our region do some form of non-discriminatory carbon border adjustment, the bigger the markets get that we can hope to sell into.
Well, I think that leads into, how can we ensure that decarbonisation actually becomes a competitive advantage for Australian industry, not a burden? We might just pause for a short break and then come back and get into that.
The largest Australian workplace changes in over a decade
Underpaying workers could result in crippling fines.
There'll be new rules about when a casual employee has the right
employees will have the right
to disconnect.
Workplace laws are changing. Pay attention or pay the price. Safeguard your business with Australian Industry Group. The legal experts at Australian Industry Group will help you navigate the new legislation and prepare your business for the changes. Become a member today at aigroup.com.au.
And welcome back. We were talking post the announcement of the 2035 emissions target, and I'm speaking with Tennant, Director for Climate and Energy at Australian Industry Group, to understand what this means for industry and how can we transition industry. So, Tennant, just to take up that conversation we were finishing just before the break, how can we ensure that decarbonisation becomes a competitive advantage for Australian industry and not just a burden? We still need to export, we still need to engage in global trade.
More than ever. That's right. And so the single biggest thing that can be done to build competitiveness while pursuing low and zero emissions is only partly in the hands of industry. It's about the electricity system. Now, there's many things that will help us to decarbonise, but a large and expanding supply of zero emissions electricity at a competitive all-in price is like a very big factor. And Australia has this potential for an advantage there because we have such a vast and high quality set of energy resources. Our potential for generating wind energy, our potential for generating solar is absolutely colossal. And we have so much land, even though, of course, somebody has an interest in every square metre of that land, and landholders need to be respected and involved in the development of energy on that land. But if we can turn that potential advantage into reality by making it a great deal easier to build, by speeding up both the economic regulation approvals processes on transmission lines and the planning and environmental approval processes, we could be one of the best places in the world to use electricity, especially in energy-intensive commodities like green iron, like green ammonia. Anything that you can do with electricity, we could be a good place. But today, we're a pretty mediocre place to use industrial electricity. Our old fossil cost advantage has basically gone with the evening out of prices for black coal and for natural gas between the Australian market and international energy markets. And our coal-fired power stations are not as hale and hearty as they used to be. And so we really need to get on with that job of rebuilding the electricity system and building it bigger, because we're going to demand a lot more electricity. The other things that can be done, though, using energy smarter can be an advantage for both the whole system and for individual businesses. A world with a lot more renewable energy is a world where there's large differences between the value or the cost of electricity at noon versus at 6 p.m. And if your usage and your own generation or storage of energy, which is becoming a more practical thing for more and more facilities, if you can time that usage or that supply around those regular swings, very foreseeable swings in the value of that, then your total cost of using energy can be a lot lower. And for some businesses, that's a nice to have. If you're sufficiently electricity intensive, that's life or death.
And I agree. I think there is a lot of opportunity, for those sorts of companies, but also for us to become, a global power in clean energy. But opportunity and hope is not necessarily strategy. We need a whole lot of different policies. You mentioned sticks and carrots announced yesterday. But beyond funding, what kind of smart policy support do we need to help in the industry transition, especially for those smaller facilities who are not covered by the safeguard?
Yes, and there will be consideration in the review next year of whether to expand the safeguard, and if so, how. It probably will get bigger and cover potentially several hundred more facilities, but there's like 1 million businesses in Australia. Most of them will never be suitable to be directly covered by a very demanding accounting and reporting system like the safeguard. And so there are other options. Now, one family of options is about voluntary or opt-in arrangements to credit facilities that change their energy source or improve their use of energy. That could be an opt-in to the safeguard mechanism just for the carrot side of it, so that you can sell credits to other facilities that are having a harder time adopting emissions reduction technology, which is often a timing thing about when your last major facility upgrade was. There's also, though, some schemes operated today by the states, the New South Wales Energy Security Safeguard and the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program, and they credit today facilities that are switching from gas to electrify their operations, for example. Building on those and making similar options available in the rest of the country could be a very useful way to make it easier to upgrade, not just financially easier, but provide some highly motivated parties in the form of energy services businesses or the electricity and gas retailers who are directly obligated by those state schemes to go looking for these opportunities. Because if it doesn't matter if the numbers stack up, if you don't know the opportunity is there, you're not going to take it up. Then beyond those credits, there could be like a lot of other opportunities. The government could consider tax incentives, which have been used by the government for hydrogen. They will be conscious of the cost, and these days governments are feeling pretty cautious about large new budget commitments. But I think there has already been some financial commitment, and the thing about a tax incentive is you don't need to go and fill out a form and apply for it. You just do the thing, and then you do your tax return at the end of the financial year, rather than what can be a very slow and bureaucratic process with grants programs. So there's a lot to be said for that if governments reckon they can foot the bill and if they can set up the tax rules in a way that's actually navigable, which is not always the case.
No, and I mean, listeners might immediately be thinking of pink bats. I mean, there's a lot of unintended consequences sometimes with these sorts of programs. I think lessons have been learned, and I think we're all, wide-eyed now. But it's really clear that government's going to have to just think of use every tool in their toolbox, work with industry, and try to think imaginatively. We're just about at time, Tennant, but the audience for this podcast is both policymakers and industry leaders. I don't know if you have one message that's different for each or one message for both, but what would your final message or messages be to policymakers and industry?
Look, for policymakers, beyond what I've already been emphasising about making it easier to build things, part of that is prioritising. There are so many expectations that governments place on new projects. They want them to advance 1,000,001 different agendas, whether that be various forms of social inclusion, local economic development, the advancement of local content. They need to think about what they really, really want, because if you ask for everything, you may not like the cost of what you get in the end. For industry leaders, I think the thing to keep in mind is we're not going to solve the decarbonisation problem, for the most part, by doing the same things as today, but just in a clunkier, more expensive way. There are solutions out there whose selling point is you don't need to change anything. You'll just pay twice the price for something to put into the capital equipment or the vehicle that you use today. And we may need to do some of that. But if we look at what's happened in electricity, where we used to think we'd all be using coal-fired electricity from coal-fired power stations with carbon capture and storage bolted onto the end of them, and it'd be just the same except it would cost 50% more. We're not doing that. The electricity system is becoming heavily renewable. That's a more complicated change. That takes a lot of change management, but the result is going to be quite a lot cheaper than we used to think. And when we're looking at heavy transport or industrial processes or how we heat buildings, we're probably going to need to be open to more fundamental process changes and paradigm shifts, and not just do the same thing but worse from a cost point of view.
Thanks, Tennant. That very, very nice wrap up. Really not just of the issue, but our objective with this debrief. The D stands for digitalisation, decarbonisation and diversification. And by diversification, we don't just mean supply chains, we also mean business models, products, the entire structure. So thanks very much. The industry's path to 2035 won't be easy, but it is essential. And with tailored solutions, fair policy and a focus on competitiveness, we hope to turn challenge into opportunity. If you found this podcast via the AI Group website, please subscribe on your usual podcast platform so you don't miss an episode. And if that platform lets you leave a review, please do take the time to leave one. My name's Louise McGrath. I've been joined by Tennant Reid. And if you have any comments or questions, please email us on industry.policy@aigroup.com.au, and we'll speak again soon.